Hello, thank you very much for joining us on platform on the network service of the NTA. I'm Ruth Aguela. According to current statistics, about 14.8 million Nigerians are aged 60 years and above. And the number we hear will continue to grow. Of course, you know, people grow old every day. An aging population, no doubt, poses numerous social and economic challenges, but with the right set of policies, it can equip a society to address these challenges in due time. Poverty, coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a hard toll on older persons in the country, necessitated the federal government's move to develop the national policy on aging. And with the establishment of the National Senior Citizen Center that falls under the purview of the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development to cater for the needs of older persons in the country, from healthcare, income entitlement, engagement of capacities for older persons, psychological well-being, and other needs of older persons, of course. Now, with the coming on board of the National Senior Citizen Center, what are the prospects and projections in addressing challenges around older persons in the country? How will the rights of older persons be protected from abuse and discrimination? How will the national policy on aging be effectively implemented? Will there be hope at the end of the tunnel for older persons, you ask? Well, I'm sure my guest has answers to some of these questions and more. Our focus on platform today is the place of senior citizens and development in Nigeria. My guest is Dr. Omokaro, Director General, National Senior Citizen Center, a dogged woman who has refused to grow old as she continues to strive hard to see older persons have a better life in the country. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I think this is the best place to be, Ruth. Laraba.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and of course I have my panelist, Laraba Mure. She's from the Abuja Inquirer newspaper here in Abuja. She's a reporter there. Thank you very much, Laraba, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let me quickly go through a bit, I said a bit of the profile of Dr. Omokaro because she has a handful of it. Dr. Omokaro is the Executive Director of Dave Omokaro Foundation, an organization in special consultative status on aging with ECOSOC, United Nations, and a global training partner of the International Institute on Aging, United Nations, Malta. She has served as a visiting and also a lead scholar with the National Universities Commission as focal person, facilitating the development of benchmark statements and minimum academic standards in PGD, MSc, and PhD studies in gerontology, and the training of teaching staff in gerontology in 11 Nigerian universities. Dr. Omokaro has served in the team of African experts for the review and revision of the African Union Policy Framework on Aging and Plan of Action in 2002. She is a member editorial board of INEA, Journal of Aging in Developing Countries, and special editor on Focus on Aging in Africa as convener and co-chair of the stakeholder group on Aging Africa. Dr. Omokaro has enhanced rights, advocacy, legislation, and research. She holds a PhD in development sociology from the University of Calabar and postdoctoral certificate in sociology gerontology from the International Institute on Aging, UN Malta. She is a recipient of numerous academic awards and author of many academic papers in aging. I could go on and on. But she's presently the Director General, National Senior Citizen Center. Congratulations, your hard work paid off. We hope to see the result of, you know, being the head. This is the first time Nigeria is going to be having a center for older persons in the country. So, well done. And the federal government, we must commend them for that initiative.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right, now, let's begin this way, Dr. Omokaro. Once again, welcome to Platform.
Thank you.
In your words, you said it has been extremely difficult to be old in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And gone were the days, you know, when the plight of older persons, we hear, they only come out to just complain. Yeah. There is no strategic, you know, structure for them.
Yes.
Tell us briefly, you know, how is it then? And what has changed now, you know, with the coming on board of the National Senior Citizen Center?
Yeah, then, first and foremost, let me thank you for having me again. And then let me also applaud our older persons, our senior citizens, for their resilience over the years, in spite of, the drudgery of old age then. Of course, comparatively, you know that there is no way you can say for sure that you have programs and activities and a budget line to integrate any population group in development process if you do not have the institutional structures to articulate exactly what you want to do, who you want to do it for, and the outcomes that you want.
Yes.
So that was the situation for older persons in Nigeria. So any approach to, inclusion of older persons in any kind of program and activity was haphazard. It was arbitrary. It was not compelled. Why? Because there was no policy in place which would, direct the action and direct the interventions and really spell out the coordinating actors, and spell out the outcomes, the monitoring, and the framework, evaluation framework. And then there was also no coordinating institution. As you know, aging is very expansive, very comprehensive, and it has many intersecting issues, which means that so many ministries have aspects of aging, what would pertain to older persons. So for aging to have been for issues of older persons to have been in one unit in a ministry meant that they really, every other thing fell through the cracks. And that was how it was then. So the difference now is that there is a national policy in place, which means there are directives, which means it really has been, the vision is clear, which means the framework is clear. And then the objective is clear, and the interventions are there spelled out. And when you now operationalize that through an implementation plan, then it means you already have seen the outcome. And so you will now be able to now integrate all the different aspects of aging, with their diverse aspects of aging. As you know, it's a diverse population. So you would have been able to think through all the needs assessment to meet the needs of the diverse population, whether they are in the urban center, in the rural, in the remote areas, whether they are male or female, whether they are poor or rich. So where you didn't have that, it means that nothing could have been done. And then now we also have a central body set up by a legislation which speaks to the sustainability, the legality of this establishment. And then the central body now has a directive, a mandate by law to identify now the needs and to cater for the needs, which means this focal body now can now work very strategically with the diverse agencies, the ministries, to now draw out what pertains to older persons. So we can comfortably say, as the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Hajia Sadiya Umar Farouk rightly said, that before now, it used to be, arbitrary. But now, there is a body that is set to look at it comprehensively and sustainably. So that's the difference. So then it was older persons falling to families who could care.
Yes.
And where there were no families who could care.
I like the word "who could care."
Yes, of course.
Yes, because not every older person enjoys such privilege.
Exactly. So when you say family cares, family should care does not mean family can care. That's exactly.
Yeah.
So that was the window of poverty there. So you had older persons becoming destitute, had older persons who could, of course, they were paying out of pocket. And then, of course, this is the age where, multi-morbidities, chronic situations, come in. You have older persons who could hardly eat. You had older persons who were abused, stoned, because of cognitive impairment, abuse of being witches. All manners of things happened to older persons. So there was no focal point of government really looking at this population category. There was none. So now, this is what we have. So now so how do we run with this?
That's the question I'm asking now. How do we run? You know, going forward, we have a center now.
Yeah.
What will be the mandates? There's a national policy on aging. So what does it entail? What is the drive, the focus?
The Senior Citizen Center Act has, a preamble, which is a policy, sort of, like this is what should be. And that just clearly states, identify the needs and cater for the needs. And then it goes down to list the areas that the Senior Citizen Center should look at. It talks about trainings, which means it's looking at aging as not the end of life. Senior citizens, they have a lot to give.
Yes.
They are resourceful if you build their capacity.
Yes.
So the first thing there says identify the needs for trainings, development of their capacity. And then it goes on to say, talks about education, opportunities, lifelong learning opportunities. Then it goes on to talk about developing income programs, enterprise, work schemes for older persons, for senior citizens to, grow their income or supplement their income. And then it looks now at their psychological well-being. It said develop programs in sports, recreation, counseling, and all that. And then it goes on to talk about, research, which means it says research into these things, the needs assessment, the data. It talks about data. Develop a data system, because without data, you can do nothing. And then, of course, it recognizes the need to coordinate the zonal and the state.
Yes.
And to encourage the states to domesticate the National Senior Citizen Center Act, should they desire to do that. And then also to build national centers. While also it directs that the National Senior Citizen Center should build senior centers. A safe place, geographical place where older persons can congregate and enjoy themselves. Intellectually, emotionally, a one-stop place where you can go and feel good. So this is just telling us that growing old age is not the end. Old age is just the beginning. They are latent transformative assets that we have. So in other words, live your life to the fullest. That your later life should not be punishment. It should be celebratory. It should be celebrated. So this is what we have going by the Senior Citizen Center Act. And then when you put it side by side with the policy, the national policy on aging, they are saying one and the same thing. So the national policy, the thrust is to uphold the rights of older persons, to live a dignified life, a healthy life, a happy life, a secure life. And how are they going to do that? First, you have to reorient, and the National Senior Citizen Center Act says that. Reorient Nigerian citizenry, positively to change their perception of aging. And it's not only in Nigeria, the world over. Ageism is rife. Those stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination of people on the basis of age, in this case, old age. So because you're old, you're ugly. Because you're old, you're spent. You have nothing to contribute. Because you're old, you're retired. In fact, go to the village and die. Those kinds of things. That especially institutional ageism, which for a long time, that's what was happening in Nigeria. Because institutional ageism means that they were excluded from policy, excluded from budget, excluded from anything that other population group were enjoying.
During the dialogue that the center organized, in an interview, you mentioned having a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Now, and then working with MDGs. How are you planning to go about that? And then I'm just going to put 2 questions. Now, with the dialogue yesterday, you actually heard from the older persons.
Yes.
Now, I would like to know how the outcome was and also the 5-year plan.
Okay. Thank you very much. You know that the National Senior Citizen Center is the first of its kind. I would even dare to say in sub-Saharan Africa, because every other, because of the connections we have, sub-Saharan Africa is the satellite center. Every other country, when people in aging are looking at Nigeria now. Let's see where this goes, pilot this. Is first of its kind. So which means that we are not inheriting any implementation plan. There's nothing we're inheriting. This is pioneering from scratch. So what that means is that stakeholders, we have to sit down and articulate, have the clarity of the objectives. Yes, it has been spelled out, but we must look at the implications. So for me, for the center, our short term, what we must of necessity do is to have a strategic plan, which means you have articulated it. So this is, and with the outcome in mind, this is the plan. But before we go to the strategic plan, we have to have a roadmap to developing that strategic plan. It's not haphazard. You don't just get up and throw activities here and throw it here, no. How are we going to arrive at that strategic plan, implementation plan development? What are the processes and the activities that we need to consider? So that when you look at it, all the stakeholders will say, yeah, we need to do this, and this is leading here. So it's going to be a very collaborative, activity. Because first, if you get the roadmap correct, if you get the roadmap to the development of that plan right, then developing the plan itself is going to be very, very correct. So yes, we are looking to developing not just a short-term plan. Okay. Well, it's short-term, 5 years is quite short. Yes. But a 5-year, that 5-year means that we will be able to put things in place. These are our objectives, these are our goals, these are the domains we have identified, these are the activities and the programs that we need to do, and that way all our collaborating MDAs, collaborating international institutions, UN agencies, now can find out where they fit. This is what I want to collaborate with you on. So it's clear to everybody. So we have a map laid out. So it's clear. Is it health and well-being? Everything is set out. So that is what we want, that clarity, so that other collaborators can fit in. Okay,
now, since we're talking clarity, I know you just recently had a maiden dialogue with the senior citizens, and you're looking at collaboration, with MDAs, CSOs, and key players.
Yes.
Now, in what way do you hope to ensure that this implementation plan come to fruition? Because there's one thing to have policies in place. When it comes to implementation, that's always a major challenge. And with the establishment of the National Senior Citizen Center, there's a lot of hope, that has been arose, from senior citizens that yes, their plights will be addressed. But what are you looking at?
I want to say that this concern is commonplace. It's very common. If you talk to the average Nigerian about a policy, the first thing they tell you is, oh, Nigerians, we're very good at drafting policy. We have policies. Oh. But we fail when we come to implementation. I would want to say concerning the National Senior Citizen Center, that this is not a center that we can take for granted, because we know the battle that came into establishment of the center. And for the senior citizens themselves, as a matter of fact, that's why we had that Senior Citizens Forum. We want their buy-in, we want them to own it as a matter of right and law. So we want them to be the pressure group. And then, of course, the nature of the board, the way it was set up, was very deliberate. Because as I told you, aging sits in the statutory mandate of many MDAs. And the very relevant ministries, departments, and agencies are seated on that board. So that now technically ties them into the success of NSCC. And I now also want to tell you that the passion, the clarity of the vision, the clarity of the mission are very important. Leadership is very important.
Very key.
Leadership is very key. So I would want to say that where you have leaders and where we also have the opportunity by reason of the act, to look for subject matter experts, because the act clearly spells out that we should look out for subject matter experts, because aging is a specialty area. So we have that empowerment to look for subject matter experts. So when you take all this together and you have a board that is really out and dedicated to ensure that this goes, because the baby has just been birthed and put in our hands. The baby is in our hands. So it's for us to birth this legacy and to live it. So I take that very personally. I take this appointment very personally, and I see it as an opportunity that has been given to me to serve my country in the best possible way and in an area that is just my passion. So I see it as a privilege, and it's not a privilege I intend to abuse.
Okay, Larva.
Okay, I'll still go to gerontology.
Yeah.
Gerontology is very, very broad, politically.
Yeah.
How Nigerians seem still not to understand that aspect.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about it? I would like to just correct that notion, calling them, the name calling.
Yes.
Yes, ageism. You know, the name calling of calling an older person elderly. I would like you to just say something about that, and then the privileges that come with gerontology.
Okay. Yes. As a matter of fact, now I think that name gerontology is getting to settle in Nigeria, because of course we now have a Gerontology Association of Nigeria, which you belong.
Yes.
Gerontology is the study of aging and old age, and the different aspects of population aging and the implication to development, social development, economic. In other words, how does an aging population, or a population that is already aged, there are two. There's an aging population, there's a population that is already aged.
Yes.
So what are the implications to policy development, to economics? What pressure do they bring on income generation, on the working population? Do you have less people going to work? Do you have more people going to work because the population? So it's the effect of population aging on any aspect of life, whether it is the way it affects family. Of course, aging affects family. When you have
very well.
older people in the family and you have to take care of them, when they have cognitive impairment, when they have, morbidities, income is reduced, and extended income gaps, and, so it affects the family. It first and foremost affects the person himself. That's where the ageism, the interpersonal ageism comes in. What is the psychological effect of this aging? How does society look at you as an older person? So the psychology aspect of it, as it affects family, as it affects community, as it affects the nation, as it affects the economy, as it affects even, health, the health system. Is there pressure on the health system because you have more older people? Is there pressure on income generation because you have more older people? Transportation, age-friendly environment. Is the environment friendly? Can they move around? Are there barriers? So when you have a population that is aging, then any government that doesn't have the foresight to look at the health system and to look at income security, pensions, it affects pensions payouts, to look at the resources that the older population would need beforehand, then you find a situation where everything just falls apart. So gerontology is that science that studies that. So for any country, whether it's a country with a young population like Nigeria, because aging is a progression. So when you say Nigeria now, we are 200 million. And then you look at the age 50 plus and give 10 years. The people that are 50 today, they are going to be 60.
Yes.
The people that are 60 today, they are moving to 70. And then you envision in another 30 years, where so many people that are 30 today, and you know that about 60% of our population is under 35. Some are 30, 35. So give them another 30 years. So when this bulge of the youth population now grow old, now just close your eyes and imagine the aging population in Nigeria. But Nigeria is going to be a young population for a long time. But at the same time, the absolute numbers, because if you take it in percentage, you can say, oh, old people, older persons, they're only 6%, 5%, when you're talking about 200 million. But when you translate that into the absolute numbers, you see that we are growing. You just read that the current statistics is 14.9 million. 14.9 million, that is the highest population of older persons in Africa. It's the highest. If you put it together, it's more than the population in most countries in Africa.
Dr. Omokaro,
So,
you know, from what
that's
you're
what
saying,
gerontology
it's more like an eye-opener.
Yes.
A lot of us, like Laraba, we pray to grow old and age gracefully,
Yes.
just like you.
Yes.
But, you know, when you go to rural communities
Yes.
and you see
Yes.
what older persons go through,
Yes.
sometimes you may want to weep for them. I know that now the center is on board. You have your plans, some of your domains you've already started mentioning. What about the rural communities? What is their hope? Not too many centers we have in Nigeria that cater for older persons. We don't have much, especially only you find few in urban centers.
Yes.
What would be the hope of those in the rural communities?
If you were at the maiden dialogue, the senior citizens maiden dialogue, you see that invitation, the categories of older persons that were invited, it was a very deliberate list. And that was to speak to the diversity of the older persons population. We had persons who came from the rural areas, speaking their native language there. We have older persons, representing the informal sector. We have older persons from the traditional institutions in the community, rural areas. Of course, we had older persons from the diplomatic community. We had older persons from the armed forces. We had older persons from, that are pensioners who had worked in the public sector.
You know, they suffer most of the brunt, the pensioners.
Yes. So you asked about the rural. We are very aware. And I would say that before this appointment, I was in the civil society space. So we had, produced, with partnership with WHO, a documentary on aging in Nigeria. And that documentary on aging, which I used to use, the institution still uses it to teach, took us through the rural areas in Nigeria. And nobody watches that documentary and has a dry eye, because that really gives you a manifestation of the level of poverty and neglect that our rural, the rural residents that are older face. And that is what is in my head. That documentary is in my head. I see that documentary every time I talk about older persons. Yes, there is leave no one behind. So the programs and activities will spread, but our focus is going to be how to have access and reach older persons in the rural area. That is why when I was talking about, constructive, very deliberate, structured collaborations with some MDAs, we know those MDAs that will work with us, that have already nationwide structures and that reach deep down to the rural areas. Agencies like the National Orientation Agency, agencies like the National Human Rights Commission, agencies like the Legal Aid Council of Nigeria, even the Nigerian Union of Pensions, they are offering us their structures. So we will we will collaborate with major stakeholders any way we can get hold of a structure. And then, of course, don't forget that in that act, we are to collaborate and coordinate state and local. So we are planning, we are going to have, a dialogue with the Governors Forum.
I was going to ask that.
Dialogue with the, with ALGON, the Association of Local Governments of Nigeria. We are going to talk with anybody that we would talk to so that we can structure what will give us access. Because the primary healthcare, as you see it now, thank God for what the primary healthcare agency is doing, especially when it comes to immunization of, children, there are maternal and child programs. But we will we're looking to work with the National Primary Healthcare, on geriatric assessments and geriatric treatments, and how we can also provide support services from as NSCC, so that we can tunnel home help to our older people. How we can also partner with them in also training the communal care workers who already right now are all, really, tilted and biased to maternal and child. How we can also have a section, or is it to recruit new people? I don't know, but we will talk when we are, we're having that technical meeting. How we can have people who are trained in geriatric care, who can tunnel healthcare down to older people. There are families that are distressed.
Yes.
There are persons that have, cognitive impairment, dementia, the increasing incidence of dementia, and older persons are being stoned and called witches because they have cognitive impairment. So we are looking at so many things, how we can work with the case of elder abuse preventive education, elder abuse desk, working together with National Human Rights Commission and Legal Aid Council to have legal representation, to have, the report and rescue desk, to have call centers. So all these are areas that we're looking at in terms of income generation programs.
Because I was going to ask you, there's a whole lot in place. So funding be a challenge?
So first and foremost, I believe that it is very easy to get funding, even within this country. We have older persons that are elite and are very wealthy.
Yes.
Although they are 1% or 0.0005%. I have always believed, coming from the NGO space, that if you can lay out your strategic objectives, and if you can lay out your strategic plan and make it very clear and the outcomes that you want to see, then you can have a technical, serious, collaborative discussion on areas of commonality.
Yes.
That will benefit partners that are coming in.
Okay, Ma, while you were talking, you mentioned implementation.
Yeah.
Let me put it that I had the privilege of being your student, so I watched that documentary where the lady was called a witch.
Yeah.
And so now, how do you intend to implement penalty for any family that has abused any of their older persons? Is there a way that the center is going to go about that?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course, there's a way the center is going to go about that. Already we have a law that prohibits violence against persons. We have
Would there be a phone line to reach? Okay.
Let's talk about the law first. Okay. Because you asked me about remedy and redress.
Yes. How
you can get access to justice for such people. That's why I told you that we are going to collaborate with National Human Rights Commission and collaborate with Legal Aid Council to address the issue of access to justice and to see how we can work together to have desk on aging, really collaborate with all these very relevant commissions and agencies. And then how we can reorient and educate and prevent. And then like you asked, then how we can now use the law to criminalize. Of course, the law will criminalize. And one thing that the National Senior Citizen Center would do, one of the privileges, is that it will support any older person. And in fact, we want to bring a human angle to the older person's story. We don't have a mandate on pensions, to pay our pensions, or to do, we have Pension Commission, you have Peter is doing fantastic work at the federal level. But most of the, the inequities that we see are in the states. We don't have a mandate to do pensions, but we have a mandate to cater for the needs of senior citizens. And one of the needs is well-being, is income security. So where that is breached, then we have a need to tell their story, to persuade, and to find commonality, collaboration with PITAD, PENCOM, to see what can we innovate, what more can we do.
But access may be a challenge from what she's asking. Now, if she knows someone who is being abused
Yes.
in a home,
Yes.
but that person doesn't have access. She can only know, she can only help that person because she's privileged to know that person suffering from that abuse in that home. What about the older persons who suffer some of this abuse and they don't have access to help?
That is what I'm telling you now, that we are going to work with the local government. I really see how we can innovate and collaborate first to work with structures that are already in place and to build our own structures. Now, when we use, I told you we're going to use the National Orientation Agency, different languages, down to the grassroots, where this is going to go in all the languages that it needs to go, where we'll create awareness about the call center and the call lines. Yeah. Where we create awareness, that is why also we're going to collaborate with the primary healthcare agency. You see, I cannot tell you these things in details because it's not for one person to tell you in details. I talked about our strategic plan. We have a roadmap and we have a strategic plan, which is now going to spell these things in programs and activities and the outcomes that we need. But I can only share the picture that I have because I'm coming from a space that I'm coming from, that I had been working in this field. So all those gaps that we saw, that you're talking about, the older person cannot reach, he cannot call. And most of these abuses happen in the family. And sometimes even family members don't want to report because they're afraid of reprisal. We know these things.
Yes.
So everything goes underreported. So that is why we're saying that we're going to use every structure that we have. We are going to use every network. Older persons have networks. I did speak about the resilience of older persons. I presented a paper on celebrating older persons' resilience in Africa. So in spite of the fact that they've been neglected all these years, have we ever asked, how come they've survived? How come they've survived? So there are networks. And we saw this when there was a pandemic, when palliative needed to be distributed. You have the market association. You have older persons who belong there. You have faith organizations. You have older persons who belong there.
Yeah.
You have, traditional institutions. You have older persons who belong there. So we are going to really exploit all these networks, working with local government, working with states, working with NGOs in the field of aging, NGOs in the field of gender, NGOs in the field of health, NGOs in the field of, human rights. So it's going to be a whole network of support, because aging is everybody's future. And that's what we want to promote. When you know that aging is your future, you know that the National Senior Citizen Center is saving your future. So what support are you bringing? So care of older persons is everybody's concern, because either you're giving care or you're going to be old and you're going to need care. So this is the time to see ourselves as part of this network of support. Youth support for older persons. Whether you're in entertainment, Nollywood for older persons.
There are older
Nollywood for
persons
senior
there.
citizens, yes. So how we mobilize, town planners, support for older persons. Anywhere you are, you must identify that aging is your future. So we are going to really, in that strategic plan, make it very clear and very attractive how the private sector can come in and also do business, in this senior citizens population space.
I want to quickly interject from what you're just saying. I know that there is the Older Person Safety Net program,
Yes.
By the federal government to ensure an age-inclusive society. Now, I'm very sure you must have had an interface with some of these older persons who are beneficiaries of some of these national social investment programs by the federal government. What kind of impact, is it having in their lives? And will you expand on that?
Of course.
Okay.
What I want to say first, let me just use this opportunity to really thank the federal government. This administration, I have to say it anywhere I stand. On any platform, I have, because I've been in this field for years.
We saw your hard work.
Yes. This administration of His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari has been, for me, the listening, the compassionate, the passionate administration when it concerns the vulnerable, when it concerns older persons and persons with disability. those I know, and I can say it anywhere. Look at our policy, look at what we are talking now. I tell you that when I had the opportunity to look at, capital projects, because we just inaugurated, and of course, the midterm national, the plan is going on. And they say, oh, you have to plug in here because it's 2021 to 2025. When we were able to complete that exercise, I got home and I wept. I tell you, I sat on my bed and I wept. Why did I cry? I said, so, finally, we are not going to be running around cap in hand to beg for tokens for older persons. So it's no longer going to be welfare. Oh, buy wrapper, 10, buy something, slippers, and go and give to older persons. So we are talking for senior citizens, capital projects. What? In Nigeria? So yes, this administration has done senior citizens well. For the first time I saw Nigerian Union of Pensioners commending an administration. You saw them. It was so celebratory at that forum. And now, so it's for us to dream this dream and now materialize it. So it's going to happen. And all of us will work together to ensure that this happens. So that whether it is health and well-being, we strategize and we ensure. And I want to tell you that the world, when it comes to aging, the global network on aging, as far as I'm concerned, because that is my world, they are watching Nigeria. And they are applauding Nigeria, that we have put the structures in place, and they are watching to see where they can even, give us technical support. So it will happen.
I know you've already called for support from the Nollywood, the architects, but I still would like to know, is there a message from the center to the older persons?
The message for older persons, as a matter of fact, there is a mantra that was developed by persons with disability, which every other group has adopted. Nothing for us without us.
Okay.
Which means we are part and parcel. This is for us. So you hear our voices. So that's why they were the first to be engaged, senior citizens, the first to be engaged. Why did we engage them? We wanted to introduce the act to them. We wanted to empower them with information so that they can have an expectation. We wanted them not to, just okay, there's a center, and they don't know what the center is about. They don't know what the functions are. They don't know what their rights are. So your voice is your right, and your right is your voice. So we want to empower them with that. Having empowered them with that, and then introducing the vision, as much as we have been able to do it without the strategic plan, and we say work in progress when we have the plan, we expand, now gives them a sense of how expansive and how diverse this is going to go. And they are part in it, because everybody belongs to a state.
Yes.
In going to persuade their states, in going to mobilize them, their own selves. So we want a sustainable engagement mechanism with all the various stakeholders. So what is the message? The message is that on our part, the National Senior Citizen Center, this is our commitment, that we are going to drive the national agenda. And what is that national agenda? Is to address economic, social, psychological deprivation. Had been there for so many years. So we are going to drive it and address it to ensure that it's an inclusive society and that older persons' rights to a dignified life, healthy life, happy life, secured life is guaranteed. And their capacities are enhanced and they can continue to participate in what they value. And
Capacity.
should they now need care, because functional capacity do decline.
Now, capacity enhancements you just mentioned, some
You
of
have
them
care.
may be too fragile.
You came to where I was just talking about.
Some of them may be too fragile
Exactly.
to carry on with some of the skills or initiatives you want to come up with. So what other alternative will you
So
provide?
that is what I just said. That vision that we have so far been able to capture, waiting a strategic plan to work on it and really make it succinct, says talks about capacity to continue to engage in what they value and where they need quality care, it is available for them. So that now is inclusive. There are some that are fragile. There are some at some point will need long-term care. So the center, as a matter of fact, is a whole department for us. Care quality. How we bring certification and an inspectorate department to ensure that every kind of domiciliary care facility that will ever be set up after a while now, the managers and the workers would have been trained and retrained by a national standard curriculum, which we are going to work very closely with Federal Ministry of Health. Of course, you know they have the core mandate on health.
Yes.
So we are going to work very closely with the Federal Ministry of Health, and then, of course, with the professional associations. Those are the subject matter experts, to ensure that we develop a national curriculum on care, because we are not going to compromise on quality. So where they are fragile and they need care, even where they need health promotions, they need to know what to do to stay healthy. Our primary healthcare center is going to save our senior citizens.
You know, we're rounding off this conversation. I'm just imagining the joy, the hope in the minds of a lot of senior citizens across the country at this moment. But for you personally, looking ahead from now, what would you want to see? Because a few years back, you didn't envisage this will happen.
Yeah.
So what is your projection, going forward?
Looking ahead, I just want to see where older persons now have senior centers everywhere in the country. Because we are building senior centers. That facility is a safe place where they can go recreate. And of course, you know that senior centers is not going to be standard for every kind of place.
Yes.
Some will be agency-oriented model, where it's going to have support services, really support services. Some of it is going to be in the urban centers. We have those ones can be totally recreational, So needs assessment will determine what kinds of centers. But how be it, I want a situation where care is accessible to older people, whether it's primary care, whether it's long-term care, and that care is quality. Where older persons can say, okay, if you abuse me, I know what to do. Where they're empowered with information and with call lines. Where people now will be scared to abuse an older person, knowing that there are structures on ground. Where older persons would have regained their voices and they are very happy. Yesterday, they gave themselves a name. I mean, it was so celebratory. They have a title now, Senior Citizens of Nigeria, SCN. So I'm a senior citizen, I add my title, SCN. So Dr. Mm Omokaro, SCN, Senior Citizens of Nigeria.
You want to ask a final question, we're rounding up.
So joyful older persons, dignified, that's what I want to see. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, talking about inclusivity, empowerment, healthcare of older persons, and then you also mentioned the care given to them. How is the capacity building?
Exactly.
Yes. How do you intend to build them, even though we talked about how fragile they can be, but what specifically do you intend to empower them in?
I think that is the realm for the strategic plan.
Okay.
I want to leave it there because I can't tell you that.
But you may want to answer that briefly.
Yes, I want to answer that briefly.
Okay.
If you notice in our communities, you see that, in fact, research has shown that 70% of older persons aged 60 to 64 years, 70% of them are engaged. So when they say they are retired, they are engaged. Most are in the informal sector. And 50% of those 65 years above are engaged. What are they engaged doing in the informal sector? They are running subsistence livelihood programs from hand to mouth. And if you look at your community, you see what your community is endowed with. You see that old man who had been weaving that basket, still weaving that basket. When he was young, now he's very old. He's still the same basket, the same design he's weaving. And in that community, you have all the raw materials and everything. And yet that old man is still sweating man labor. So what are we going to do? We are looking at identifying older people in places like that who have been manning these things for years and seeing how we can upscale that. But we want, our focus also is intergenerational. How do we incentivize the youth of that community to be part of that? How do we expand that goal? And is it technology? Is it digital? What do we need to do? That is where the stakeholders, the community youths, the older persons who have been manning these things, will talk together. So
I know,
think that would
Dr. Omokaro, if I allow you, you're going to continue because you're one person who is very passionate about this. And we must commend your hard work. We must, pray that you succeed.
Amen.
And because each and every one of us, whether we like it or not, we will cross that line.
It's a
We will
prayer.
grow old.
Amen.
That is our prayer.
Yes.
Laraba, you don't want to grow old?
Of course I want.
The way she was looking at me. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your time on platform.
Media, you have been our best friends forever.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
so much.
Laraba Mure from the Abuja Inquirer newspaper. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your
for
input.
having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, we've been looking at the place of senior citizens and development in Nigeria. There's a whole lot to be done. And already the ball is in the court. But each and every one of us have a role to play. The goal is to ensure that Nigeria has an all-inclusive society where older persons will have a dignified, happy, healthy, and fulfilled lives. That's Platform. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Ruth Agwele. Bye.